Good evening. Tonight, the candidates in one of the most watched Senate races in America are squaring off in their first debate in just moments. Senator Marco Rubio and Congressman Patrick Murphy will take the stage at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. Here at ABC Action News, we're committed to Democracy 2016, bringing you the best political coverage so you can make informed decisions. We've teamed up with Politico Florida and ABC stations across Florida to bring you this live debate. After the debate, we'll discuss the night's key takeaways. We now take you live to Orlando.
Good evening. I'm Jonathan Carl. We're here at the University of Central Florida for this year's first debate between Republican Senator Marco Rubio and Democratic Congressman Patrick Murphy. Tonight's debate is brought to you by WFTV in Orlando in partnership with ABC News and Politico Florida. I will be moderating along with panelists Greg Warmoth and Nancy Alvarez of WFTV and Mark Caputo of Politico Florida. By coin flip, the opening statement goes to Patrick Murphy. First, let me explain the rules. There will be questions. You will have 1 minute, 30 seconds to respond to each of them, and then 30 seconds for a rebuttal. The candidates are not allowed to ask questions of each other. That is something you two agreed to. We will be doing the questioning in this. And now, Congressman Murphy, opening statement.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be with you all this evening. I was born and raised in the Florida Keys. Got my start as an auditor and CPA. And I decided to get involved in public service because I was tired of the name calling, the finger pointing, all the bickering. And I'm proud of my accomplishments in the Congress over the past 4 years. Proud that I was able to prevent cuts to Medicare. Proud of the legislation I was able to pass to help lower our flood insurance rates. And proud of the provisions I passed on the House Intelligence Committee to help keep this country safe. And that's exactly why I've been ranked as one of the most independent members of Congress, because I'll work with anybody to solve a problem. And you compare that to my opponent, Marco Rubio, who tells us he doesn't even like the job, right? Which explains why he's got the worst voting record of any senator from Florida in nearly 50 years, and still hasn't committed to serving a full term in the U.S. Senate. And if that's not bad enough, he just doubled down on his endorsement of Donald Trump, showing he'll continue to put his own political agenda in front of what's best for Florida. I believe we can do more. I believe we can do better, and that's why I'm running to be the senator from Florida.
Senator Rubio.
Thank you. I want to thank all of you, the congressmen and University of Central Florida, for having us here today. And let me begin by saying tonight, 18 years ago tonight, I married my wife, Jeanette. It was the best decision that I've ever made, and I want to thank her for her support for all these years. And I want to thank her for working alongside me in public service. Many of you know my story already. I am the son of a bartender and a maid who were immigrants from the island of Cuba. If they had gone to almost any other nation on this planet, there is no way I would be standing on a stage like this tonight. I have a debt to this country I will never fully repay. But I've chosen to try to repay a part of it through public service, and I'm proud of what we've done. In my 9 years in the Florida legislature, 2 of them as Speaker, and in my 6 years in the United States Senate. Tonight, throughout this debate, you will hear about the numerous accomplishments, things that I've done, real things, not just letters I signed on to, not just bills that I co-sponsored, but laws that we passed that have been good for America and good for the state of Florida. And I invite you to compare that to Patrick Murphy's record in Congress, who after 4 years has not a significant achievement he can point to. So I look forward to that debate tonight. It's important for our state to know what their choice is this election.
Congressman Murphy, Hillary Clinton's campaign has been hampered by concerns about her use of a private email server to send classified information, something the FBI called extremely careless. And we had a recent transcript that leaked showing Clinton saying that it is important for politicians to, quote, have a public and private position on issues. You've said you trust her 100%, but most Floridians don't. So my question to you is, why should they trust you, given your unqualified confidence in a presidential candidate that 6 out of 10 Americans say they do not trust?
Well, Secretary Clinton has already apologized for what she did. And she made it clear that she regrets that decision and, in hindsight, wouldn't do it again. And that's a lot more than you can say about Donald Trump. You see, I trust Secretary Clinton with the nuclear codes. My opponent, Marco Rubio, made it clear. Not only does he think Donald Trump is a con man, he went on to say he doesn't trust Donald Trump with the nuclear codes. So I don't know what's changed from now to then, but I believe that Secretary Clinton is as qualified as anybody we've ever had to fill this role. She will hit the ground running on day one. And you compare that to Donald Trump, who's as unfit and unqualified as anybody we've ever had for this office, who is bragging about sexually assaulting women, right? You see the vast amount of women that have come out recently with these charges. It is shameful to me. And I don't understand how Senator Rubio can look himself in the mirror and still stand by Donald Trump's side after everything that's come out about him.
Well, I would say if Congressman Murphy trusts Hillary Clinton 100%, he's in rare company, because not even Tim Kaine is willing to say that, and he's her running mate. The second thing that I would tell you is I don't trust either one of them. And the job of a U.S. Senator is not to blindly trust the president because they happen to be from your own party. The job of a U.S. Senator in our republic is to represent their state and to fight and uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. And I am prepared to do that no matter who is elected to the presidency. And that is one of the big differences in this campaign. Of the two of us on this stage tonight, there is only one person who, if I goes to the Senate, will stand up to the next president of the United States, and that is me, because I have done it consistently throughout this campaign, including repeatedly taking on the nominee of my own party.
But, Senator, if you can't stand up to Donald Trump as a candidate, how in the world are you going to stand up to him as the President of the United States? Think about what he's done. Think of how unqualified he is. Just a couple weeks, it came out that he has violated the embargo, something that I know you care a lot about, and you still stand by his side. He said that Mexicans are rapists and criminals. Right? He wants to deport 11 to 12 million people from this country. Right? He makes fun of disabled people and veterans, and you've continued to stand by his side. You see, there's been 16 U.S. senators that had the courage and the internal fortitude to not only disavow Donald Trump, but unendorse him. And you doubled down on your endorsement of him. So where's the courage? It proves to all of us that you're going to continue to put your own political ambition in front of what's best for Florida.
Congressman Murphy, on this stage tonight, there's only one person that's ever run against Donald Trump and tried to defeat him, and that was me. There's only one person on this stage tonight that's ever voted against Donald Trump, and that was me. And by the way, there's only one person on this stage tonight whose family made millions of dollars in partnership with Donald Trump, and that's you.
So, Senator Rubio,
Another lie.
let's turn to your party's nominee a little bit more here. You questioned Donald Trump's sanity. You've called him a con man, a lunatic. You've said he couldn't be trusted with the nuclear codes. You've said he is, quote, the most vulgar person ever to aspire to the presidency, and that was months ago, before the current revelations. Now, as Congressman Murphy has alluded to, at least 10 women have come forward to allege that they've been inappropriately touched or worse by Trump in ways precisely that he described. So, my question to you is, how do you explain to your sons and your daughters why you believe that a man who boasted of committing sexual assault should be President of the United States of America?
Well, if there are any kids in America who understand what a horrifying choice America has in this election cycle, it's mine, because they've lived through it over the last 14 months. It's not just my children. I feel terrible for the young people across America I run into every day that tell me this is the first time I'm ever going to vote, and what they have before them are two deeply flawed candidates. I stand by everything I ever said in the Republican primary. And I would admit right off the bat, this is not the most inspirational choice we've ever had in American history in terms of these two candidates. There's no doubt that there is a lot of things I disagree with in the nominee of my party, and I've taken him on when he says things that are wrong on policy, and I've condemned him when he said things that are aggressive, outrageous, vulgar, and inappropriate, and I will continue to do so. The problem is the other party has nominated someone who has repeatedly violated federal law. They violated someone who destroyed evidence. They violated someone who we cannot trust with classified information. They nominated someone who lied to the family of 4 brave Americans who lost their lives in the service of our country in Benghazi, and who today, on this very day, it was revealed from documents from the FBI that her State Department was trying to get the FBI to unclassify certain documents so her emails would be compliant. A person who has a 30-year record of scandal and outrage. That's who they've nominated. And so this election is a disturbing choice between someone that I disagree with on many things and someone who I disagree with on virtually everything. It is a difficult and less than ideal choice, and that is why it's so important that our next U.S. Senator is someone willing to stand up and take on whoever the next President of the United States is. And the only one running on this stage tonight that will do that is me.
But Senator Rubio, is there anything that Donald Trump could say or do that would cause you to rethink your decision to support him to be president of the United States?
Of course, like a lot of the things that Hillary Clinton stands for and does. If he were to do those things, then we would have no choice in this election. Listen, I think it's pretty clear Donald Trump was not my first choice or even my 10th choice to be the nominee of the Republican Party. 14 million voters in the Republican primaries chose differently. But one of the reasons why I changed my mind and ran for re-election is because I know that no matter who wins this election, you are going to need people in the United States Senate willing to stand up to the next president of the United States when they are wrong on policy or when they are wrong on their behavior. And I'm the only one running that will. I have repeatedly done so when it comes to the nominee of my party. Congressman Murphy hasn't once broken with the nominee of his party. When she's been caught doing all these things, he has not once condemned her, not once pointed finger at her, has not once broken with her on any of her behaviors, or quite frankly, on any of her major policies.
Congressman Murphy.
Yes, I mean, it's disturbing to hear my opponent say this. After it came out that Donald Trump had been taking advantage of women, that he is a serial, abuser. Senator Rubio tweeted something out, 160 GOP officials had the courage to stand up and say that that is wrong, and they unendorsed Donald Trump. So no, this isn't just a binary choice, and there are people that have the courage to stand up to do what's best. And I appreciate your question, because you do have to look your children in the eye in 10 to 15 years from now and explain this position. There's a famous quote from James Clark. It says, "A politician thinks of the next election. A statesman thinks of the next generation." Sometimes in life, you got to think a little bit deeper, right? You got to dig inside and think about the consequences of what we're doing, of what we're saying, of what our candidates represent. And it's exactly why I have one of the most independent voting records in the entire Congress. Because I don't put on blinders and just vote. I do what I think is best, and I will always stand up for something if I think it's wrong.
All right, let's turn.
If I may interject, I am thinking about the next generation, Congressman. I'm thinking in specific about my 4 children, which is why I don't want to see Hillary Clinton to be president of the United States, because she will redefine the Supreme Court in a way that will redefine the Constitution of the United States for the better part of a quarter century. And I also am thinking about my children because of the Iran deal, which this president put in place and which you wholeheartedly support, an Iran deal that delivers billions of dollars to the world's leading sponsor of terrorism, an Iran deal that already delivered hundreds of millions of dollars in cash to the Ayatollah in Iran. It's a deal that you support, a deal that you said is going to lead to peace in our time. Well, look up the history books. The last person that said that has regretted it for over 80 years. This deal will not lead to peace in our time. It will lead to a nuclear Iran with missiles capable of reaching the United States of America. That's the future that I'm concerned about, and those are the policies Hillary Clinton supports, and so do you.
You said you don't trust Donald Trump with the nuclear codes. You sit on the Intelligence Committee. You know what's at stake in this election.
Right.
Donald Trump wants to be buddies with Vladimir Putin. Says there's nothing wrong with him, that he's a strong leader. You should know better than that. We're both on the Intelligence Committee. The difference is I show up to those committees. I show up, and I'm there because it's important when it's national security at stake. But my opponent continues to put his own political ambition in front of what's best for Florida, in front of protecting our country.
I am, and so are you on the Intelligence Committee, Congressman. And if any of your staffers had ever done what Hillary Clinton did with classified information, they would have been fired and they would have been prosecuted. And yet you still stand with her. I don't trust Hillary Clinton with classified information. She has proven that she cannot handle it and that she would expose it to foreign intelligence agencies as she has.
Excuse me, you trust Donald Trump with classified information?
Well, again, but listen, this choice, and when it comes to this election, I've already admitted to you, these are two less than ideal options that we have before this country. I'm not arguing here that this is a race between Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. These are two deeply flawed candidates, which is why it's so important, as I've already said repeatedly, that we have a candidate for the U.S. Senate that, if elected, will stand up to these people. In this election, the only one that stood up to both candidates is me. Apparently, Congressman Murphy thinks that Hillary Clinton can do no wrong, and the vast majority of Floridians disagree with that sentiment.
We have to get to the panel, but one other question on the nuclear codes. You've said that you don't trust Donald Trump with the nuclear codes because of his temperament, because he's unstable, because you said he was a lunatic.
I have deep reservations about the nominee of my party.
Do you not trust Hillary Clinton with the nuclear codes?
I don't trust Hillary Clinton on foreign policy, which could lead to a conflict anywhere in the world that this nation cannot afford and should not be involved in. I don't trust her on foreign policy because she's the author of the Russian reset, which has emboldened Russia in a way we had never seen until she not only entered into that agreement, but bragged about it. I don't trust her on foreign policy because she supports the Iran deal, which is delivering billions upon billions of dollars to a radical nation led by an Ayatollah in Tehran, that not only wants to acquire nuclear weapons, but has threatened to use them against the state of Israel. I don't trust her foreign policy.
Greg.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you both for being here. Congressman Murphy, you've called for gun buyers to be checked against what's known as the terrorist watch list. Yet the Pulse nightclub shooter, Omar Mateen, happened about 12 miles from here, was not on that list when he bought his weapon, and some worry that such a watch list provision would actually racially profile lawful citizens and infringe their Second Amendment rights. Can you explain what attacks this would have stopped based on your beliefs?
Yes, thank you for that question. And so important we talk about that as we're here in Orlando. From Newtown to Orlando. You know, we cannot let these tragedies become the new norm. And I had a chance to meet Christine Leinonen, who's actually with us this evening. See, she's one of the bravest people I've ever met. Her son, Christopher, was killed in the Pulse shooting. And Christine has found the courage to stand up and look for solutions. And if she can find the courage to find solutions, we should be able to stand with her for solutions. And that's why I believe that we must close the terrorist loophole, that we must expand background checks to ensure that these weapons aren't getting in the wrong hands. We should be investing more in mental health, right? And these are things that are supported by the vast majority of Americans, the vast majority of gun owners. But you think about my opponent, Marco Rubio, who's taken millions and millions of dollars from the gun lobby, who's doing their bidding in the U.S. Senate. And that's shameful. You see, he just dropped a piece of legislation for this so-called terrorist loophole, and it's shameful. It was written by the NRA, and he's putting it up as if it's his legislation. It would do nothing to prevent these acts of violence from happening again. We can do more, but my opponent, Marco Rubio, has continued to stand against every sensible piece of legislation, things like background checks, closing the terrorist gun loophole. It's unconscionable to me that in this day and age, a suspected terrorist can walk into a gun store, buy a weapon that day, and walk out with it. How in the world are we going to live with ourselves if that's allowed? Senator Rubio is too concerned with his next election, next presidential bid, whatever it might be, and too worried about his special interest donors.
Senator?
Well, I think that a couple points are important to say. Number one, we are here in Orlando today. And irrespective of our individual political views, I don't think there's any doubt that all of us were heartbroken at what happened in Orlando. The stories of the people who lost their lives, although I didn't know any of them personally, I've had the chance to meet a number of their family members afterwards. And in their stories, I recognize people that I know, that are in my family, that are in our community, and that we love. But let's not forget what happened in Pulse was not a random act of violence. It was a terror attack by a radical Islamic terrorist, a jihadist, who has pledged allegiance to ISIS, a group that I have been warning about for 4 years while the president was still saying they were just a JV team. And Congressman, my law was not written by the NRA. It was written by my staffers. In fact, the NRA hasn't even come out in support of the law that I've written. It is a law that would say that if you have been investigated for terror any time in the last decade and you try to go in and buy a gun, that sale will be suspended and the FBI will be notified and they will be given the opportunity to see what you are up to and investigate you. And if they find that, in fact, you are up to a plan on terror, they can immediately arrest you. And by the way, the law that I wrote has a chance of passing, which is a fundamental difference between Congressman Murphy and I. I get laws passed. I get things done. He does not. And we cannot afford a U.S. senator that cannot turn ideas into policy.
Can I just comment? Because I don't think the senator knows what his bill does. You see, in his legislation that was put forward, this says that the FBI has to prove that it's a suspected terrorist. If the FBI knew that they were terrorists, they'd already be in jail. Your bill does nothing. It's a sham. And it's shameful that you sit here in front of Christine, in front of Brandon, in Orlando, and look them in the eye and saying you're actually trying to do something. And the audacity that you have to say that you decided to run for the Senate after this Pulse nightclub shooting, when you've been one of the most anti-gay senators in the country and done nothing to prevent these tragedies from happening.
Nancy.
No, excuse me. What's shameful is your effort to politicize a horrible tragedy for our country, which was a terrorist attack by radical Islamic terrorists that we could have defeated had it not been for people like you who continue to support these devastating cuts to our military, which you said would make us stronger. Second, that is not what my bill does. It says anyone who's been investigated for terror. Obviously, if you are on the terror watch list, that would immediately trigger this watch. The reason why Omar Mateen was able to buy a weapon is he was no longer under active investigation. And what this bill would do is it would say if you have even been suspected of terror in the last decade, the FBI will be notified that you've gone in to buy a gun and will have the opportunity to stop that sale and to investigate what you're up to. It does have due process protections, because while those lists are informative, they are not perfect. And there are people in this country who wind up on those lists or even under investigation that end up being cleared and including a journalist at the Weekly Standard in Washington, D.C.
Okay, Nancy.
Senator, let's stay on the topic of what happened at Pulse. Because as you know, because you say you met some of the families, it was Noche Latina. It was Latin night. So most of the victims at the Pulse nightclub that night of the attack were Hispanic. Some survivors and some family members of some victims spoke to me personally about being afraid to ask for help for fear of being deported. People working across our state, including students at this very university, share those same fears. Some are terrified about what may happen in November. When it comes to immigration reform, what is your response to some Latinos who say, you could have made something happen during your first term, but you simply sold out?
Well, first of all, I would say that we helped scores of families involved in the Pulse nightclub attack. In fact, my office embedded 2 staffers in the Victim Aid Center for over a month and helped numerous people not just navigate the process, but also bring relatives in from abroad. And we never asked anyone's status in our helping of them. I personally intervened with the director of the FBI because there was an issue in getting aid because the FBI was involved and literally their letterhead had the FBI letterhead on it, and so it impeded the ability to deliver aid.
Sure
as far as the people,
a lot, but they fear being.
Well, I understand. I'm going to get to that part of your question on the issue of immigration that you ask about. Listen, immigration is not something I read about in a book, nor is it an issue that I discovered 4 weeks ago when Patrick Murphy's consultants told him he needed to do better among Hispanics. This is an issue that I understand personally. My wife's family are immigrants. My parents were immigrants. My grandparents were immigrants. I live in a community of immigrants. I personally know people, children included, who are in this country out of status, illegally brought here at a very young age. And I see the sadness that they're going through. I want to fix the problem. We cannot fix it with a comprehensive approach and a one-size-fits-all bill. The votes just simply aren't there. There's only one way forward on immigration, and it involves a 3-step process. Step 1 would be to prove to the American people that illegal immigration is truly under control. The second step would be to modernize our legal immigration system so that it's not as bureaucratic and it works better. You don't have to hire 1,000 lawyers to help you navigate the process. I know that once we've done those 2 things, the enormous majority of Americans, the enormous majority of Floridians, and the enormous majority of Republicans would support doing something very reasonable with people that are not criminals, that have been here a long time, and especially with young people who were brought here through no fault of their own.
Excuse me. You know, after hearing your story again, it's even more shocking that you turned your back on those who trusted you the most. You see, we are a nation of immigrants. That's what built this country. And you used to be the champion. You were part of the Gang of 8. You were the champion of comprehensive immigration reform. And then what happened? You decided to run for president. So you flip-flopped on that issue. And you now don't support a pathway to citizenship. You no longer support those dreamers. And if that's not bad enough, you've doubled down on your endorsement of Donald Trump, the man who wants to build a wall, who thinks that Mexicans are rapists and criminals, who wants to deport 11 to 12 million people, and that's who you're supporting? Senator, it's shocking that you continue to put your own political ambition in front of what's best for Florida and these immigrants.
If I may respond, first of all, Congressman Murphy, you've never even been involved in the immigration reform issue. You only started talking about it like 4 weeks ago. You might have signed on to some letters, maybe had a Facebook page. Your involvement on it's been 0. Number 2, I'm not sure if you've informed people that in 2013 you voted for the Homeland Security bill to restart deportations of dreamers. And number 3, you talk about flip-flop. Congressman Murphy, in December of 2011, you changed your name, you changed your party, and you moved from South Beach to West Palm Beach to run for Congress. That's not a flip-flop, that's a metamorphosis.
Senator, let's be clear. You're the one who left Florida and spent all your time in Iowa and New Hampshire. You haven't even met the mayor of Tampa. The mayor of Tallahassee I was with not too long ago. You've never even met them, and that's your home state. So don't lecture me on Florida and these flip-flops. You're the king of flip-flops.
Congressman Murphy, speaking of flip-flops, though, 3 years ago you did vote for a Homeland Security bill that would have opened the door to the deportation of dreamers. So how do you explain your actions then and your words now?
He's running for Senate.
Well, I support comprehensive immigration reform, and I always have. And I believe that we have to make sure it is comprehensive. We have to make sure, number 1, that we are securing our borders, that we know exactly who's in this country. We have to make sure that there is a pathway to citizenship, to make sure that everybody that's in this country undocumented, that they have that pathway. They've got to get in the back of the line, right? They've got to pay their back taxes, and we've got to make sure that there is that pathway. We've got to make sure those students that are in this country going to our great universities don't get deported the day after they graduate. They deserve a pathway to citizenship.
Mark Caputo.
Question for you, Congressman Murphy. You support the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, but people have seen their premiums rise. Even though it's called the Affordable Care Act, some people say these are becoming unaffordable plans. People were told they could keep their plans if they liked them, and they lost their plans. What do you say to those people, and what do you propose to do about this problem?
Well, the Affordable Care Act was a huge step forward for our country, but it's not perfect, and there's many things that we have to do to improve it. And that's exactly what I've spent my time in the Congress trying to do, is find those moderate reforms to improve the Affordable Care Act. And you think of my opponent, Senator Marco Rubio, right, who has spent the last 6 years in the Senate trying to undermine that legislation. You see, he wants to take us back to the days where women could be charged more than men just for being women, where insurance companies could deny you coverage if you had a pre-existing condition, where insurance companies could drop you if you got sick, right? That's where Senator Rubio wants to take us back to. I believe there are some common sense reforms we can make, like expanding Medicaid. That would be 900,000 people in Florida alone that would have access to health care. But you've got to be willing to work across the aisle to find that common ground. You see, there's no legislation in Washington that's ever perfect, but instead of spending all your time for political purposes, trying to rah-rah your base and tell them you're going to tear it down, why don't we work for Florida, right? Why don't we work to find that common ground and get things done?
Well, I would just say that to say that the Obamacare has some problems would be the equivalent of saying the Titanic has some problems. It has enormous problems. It has incredible problems. Number one, it's running up our debt. Number two, people are losing their coverage. In about 3 weeks, over 500,000 Floridians are going to lose their coverage again. It's collapsing under its own weight because it doesn't work. By the way, one of the things I'm proudest of is that I led an effort to defund a bailout fund that they had built into Obamacare. They had put into Obamacare a fund where they were going to use your taxpayer money to bail out private insurance companies who lost money under Obamacare, and I prevented that from happening.
Senator, really quickly, we only have about 20 seconds, but when you were in the Florida legislature, Florida remained a state with one of the highest uninsured rates. Any sort of plans you guys came up with didn't work, so how can you criticize Obamacare when your solutions have failed?
Well, first of all, the solutions we had offered is one that actually provided market competition. Sadly, the governor of the state of Florida undermined that effort for 2 years, then Charlie Crist. But I've also offered a specific plan to replace Obamacare. I do not stand for what Congressman Murphy said. I've actually offered a concrete, specific, and detailed plan to replace Obamacare. Every American will either have tax-free money from their employer to buy health insurance, they will be provided health insurance from their employee, or they will have a refundable tax credit to purchase health insurance from any company they want in America across state lines.
Can I comment real quick on his plan?
We've got to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Higher education is important to me because it transformed my life. We encounter our greatest risks when we dream too small. My dream for UCF is that it be recognized as one of the great universities in this country, a large-scale institution that can meet the needs and the demands for higher education. We're blessed with a faculty and staff who are willing to put in the effort and use the power of higher education to transform lives.
Change has never been more powerful. It's Nissan's Year of the Truck and SUV event, featuring the all-new Armada and Pathfinder, and the all-new Titan and Titan XD, with America's best truck warranty. 5 years, 100,000 miles, bumper to bumper. Take on any job. Get to Nissan now for big savings, like 0% financing for up to 72 months on 11 models, or save up to $8,000 on Titan XD.
How tall are you? How do we measure greatness in America? The height of our skyscrapers? The size of our bank accounts? No, it's measured by what we do for our children, the values we pass on. I've spent my life fighting for kids and families, and it'll be my mission to build a country where our children can rise as high as their dreams and hard work take them. That means good schools for every child, in every zip code, college that leads to opportunities, not debt, and an economy where every young American can find a job that lets them start a family of their own. We face big challenges, but we can solve them the same way families do, working together, respecting one another, and never giving up. I want our success to be measured by theirs. I'm Hillary Clinton, and I approve this message.
We believe in families, in knowing your neighbors, in passing down traditions through generations. In Lakewood Ranch, we believe in a community where we put down our roots. This is our town. This is our common ground. Experience it yourself during the Tour of Homes, our annual Model Home Spectacular beginning October 21st, featuring more than 50 stunning model homes to explore throughout our award-winning community.
Welcome back to the Florida Senate debate. I'm Jonathan Carl. The next question goes to Senator Rubio. Senator Rubio, you had the worst attendance record in terms of votes of any of your colleagues in the Senate in 2015. And over the past year, you have missed a third of all roll call votes. So my question to you is, given that voting record, why should the voters of Florida send you back to the Senate, especially given this time you're not even willing to promise to serve your full 6-year term?
Well, first of all, I didn't like missing the votes. But like every sitting senator in the history of this republic that mounted a credible campaign for the presidency, I did. But I ran for president because I deeply believe this country's headed in the wrong direction. I ran for president for the same reason I ran for the Senate in 2010 and the same reason I seek re-election now. I truly believe that if we continue on the road we are on right now, we are going to be the first Americans that leaves our children worse off than ourselves. That's why I ran for the presidency of the United States. As far as my commitment to the office, however, that's proven by the results I've gotten for this state and for this country. On foreign affairs, I've passed the Girls Count Act, a bipartisan law that takes on human trafficking. My law, we passed it. I passed laws that sanction Hezbollah, the toughest sanctions ever on Hezbollah, to the point that Hezbollah has attacked me by name. I not once but twice passed sanctions on Maduro and his dictatorship in Venezuela. We passed the VA Accountability Act, again, my law that we got passed for this, that helps, obviously an incredible issue in the state because of our veterans. We passed the Foreign Aid Transparency Act. These are actual achievements of things that I've done that we've passed and that prove not only my commitment to the job and my commitment to the state, but my commitment to my service in the United States Senate. And I invite the voters to compare that to Congressman Murphy's record. He does not have a single signature achievement in his entire 4 years in the United States Congress. Not a single law that he has sponsored has been signed into law by the president of his own party. And Florida cannot afford to send to the U.S. Senate someone who has never achieved anything after 4 years of serving in Congress in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, can I clear that up, please? Senator, it's interesting you say that because you've actually co-sponsored 2 pieces of legislation that have passed the House. Legislation that'll help our citrus farmers, the folks that are unfortunately dealing with citrus greening. You signed on to legislation that will help lower flood insurance rates for so many Floridians. And I'm proud of my accomplishments, proud of what I was able to do in the minority in the U.S. Congress, one of the more dysfunctional bodies in the history of our country. And if that's not enough, what about the $2 billion I was able to reach across the aisle, find some friends to work with, and authorize to help fund the cleanup efforts for the Everglades, the intelligence provisions that have helped protect this country. And I'm proud of those accomplishments. So, Senator, back to the original question. Will you join me tonight in signing a 6-year pledge that you are committed to serving this job and not going to seek higher office?
We did have a rule of not asking each other questions. If you care to answer.
Sure. Well, can I go ahead and rebut the whole thing?
If you'd like.
Number one, I'm going to serve 6 years in the United States Senate, God willing, and I'm looking forward to it. Number two, not being in the minority is not an excuse. 4 of the 6 years I've been in the Senate, I was in the minority. Your opponent in the primary was Alan Grayson, someone who, by most accounts, is an interesting guy. And he got many more things done than you did, despite his things standing in the way of him being otherwise successful. And you talk about the Everglades, Congressman, let me tell you something. I convinced, after years of opposition, the chairman of the Water Committee, Jim Inhofe, to change his mind and support the Central Everglades Planning Project. In essence, I got more done for the Everglades in 1 day than you did in 4 years.
Just to clarify.
You got someone to change their mind? Are you serious? That's laughable.
Well,
I mean,
without
come on.
let me tell you
Senator,
that without
think
Senator
of-
Inhofe changing his mind, he was the chairman of the committee, that bill would have never moved forward. Here you have someone, and Senator Inhofe, who was one of the leading opponents of the Central Everglades Planning Project. And I spent 2 years talking to him, working with him on it. Not only did he change his mind in March, he featured the Everglades as one of the reasons why we needed to pass the water bill. This was a significant achievement because when your colleagues in the Senate trust you, listen to you, and you have influence over them, that's how you get things done, Congressman.
They don't even
That's
know
why
your
you never
name.
got
You're never
anything
there.
done. That's why you never got anything done. Your colleagues don't trust you, and you're not effective. We can't afford that. And with all due respect, we really cannot afford to have someone in the U.S. Senate that doesn't know how to get things done for the state and for the country.
Just a clarification, are you promising to fill all 6 years of your term?
Yeah, I'm going to serve in the Senate for the next 6 years.
So you're
That's a
not
God
promise.
willing.
You're not going to run
And
for
let me
president.
tell you, not only am I going to serve in the Senate over the next 6 years, we're going to get a lot done, God willing, over the next 6 years on behalf of the state. Let me give you an example of one of the things I really hope to do. We've already talked about it.
So this means you're not running for president?
I'm going to be a senator for the next 6 years on behalf of the state of Florida. You can't be a senator and president at the same time. So I am running for the United States Senate. I'm going to serve 6 years, God willing, and I am going to, one of the things I really want to work on over the next 6 years we just talked about. For me, the Everglades is personal. Out in Flamingo and Florida Bay, we've created extraordinary memories for me and my family. And I want to ensure that 20 or 30 years from now, my sons and my daughters can have the same memories with their children, and I want to be able to say that I had something to do in preserving that for them.
Okay, Congressman Murphy, you've described yourself as a small business owner, but your company is a subsidiary of a billion-dollar construction firm founded by your father. You call yourself a certified public accountant, but you have not been a CPA in the state of Florida. And for more than a year, your website said that you had 2 degrees from the University of Miami when in fact you only had 1. So my question is, have you misled Floridians about your experience and your qualifications?
Absolutely not. And I'm glad you asked this question because it's important that you all hear from me. You see, PolitiFact, an independent fact-checking agency, has already debunked these accusations. In fact, the last 6 attacks that Marco Rubio and his right-wing special interest friends have lobbed at me have all been debunked, labeled as false. Here's the facts. I am a CPA. I got my license in 2009. I'm actually one of 9 CPAs in the House of Representatives right now. And if elected to the
But not in
Senate,
Florida, correct?
I would be the 2nd CPA in the history of our country to serve there. You look at our fiscal house, I think we could probably use a few more CPAs. And I'm proud of my small business experience, proud of what I was able to do to help prevent that terrible oil spill from affecting Florida. And I'm going to continue to do what I can to reach across the aisle and solve problems. And I'm going to continue to use my background as a CPA, as a small business owner. And quite frankly, I'm happy to put my resume up as a CPA and a small business owner up against Marco Rubio, a career politician and lobbyist.
Well, if I may, those are not my attacks. That's the reporting of CBS 4 in Miami and Jim DeFede, one of the most respected and I would say feared investigative reporters in the state. Here are the facts, Congressman. You didn't run saying you were a CPA. You ran saying your experience working as a CPA would serve the country. You've never had a license to work as a CPA in Florida, so either you never worked as a CPA or you were working illegally as an unlicensed CPA. Number 2, you never had a single contract to clean up the Gulf of Mexico. So the company was only open for 5 months and it lost money from the beginning. And number 3, you didn't have a dual degree from the University of Miami because they don't give dual degrees at the University of Miami. Why does someone make things up about their record? Because they don't have a real one to talk about. He has yet to cite a single major legislative achievement in his name or a single major cause that he has led in his 4 years in Congress. Congressman, you're not some outsider running to go in the Senate. You are a sitting congressman who have been in the Congress for 4 years, and we are 40 minutes into the debate, and you cannot tell us a single signature achievement that you have been able to achieve in your 4 years in the House. Not one.
Yeah, Senator, I kind of feel bad for you how little you know about business, actually. You see, the CPA is the same in all 50 states. It's the same exact test. And small business experience actually does matter. Because I understand what small business owners are going through. I understand how tough it is to start a business. Whether that's the regulations, whether that's the taxes, I believe we can do more to help those small business owners. And that's exactly why I've done so much to reach across the aisle to help solve these problems, to help get things done for our country. You can't even commit to serving a full term. You've got one foot out the door running for president again.
Well, that's a line he practiced before I actually said what I said today about being there for the next 6 years.
I'm still curious.
Number
Is that
2,
a firm
on the
yes,
CPA,
you're committing?
well, let me tell you what I do know. and that is, you may say that the test is the same all over the country, but in the state of Florida, we have laws. And it says that you cannot work as a CPA in Florida if you do not have a Florida CPA license, which you do not have. So if you worked as a CPA, you did so illegally in the state. And as far as tough opening up a small business, listen, I have all due respect to your family and the hard work they've done. Your father has an excellent reputation. But Congressman, with all due respect, it's not that hard to open a small business when your dad opens it for you with millions of dollars that he earned.
Let's be clear. Let's just clear something out, because I never tried to hide that. The name of the company was Coastal Environmental. Right? The parent company is Coastal Construction. So you're trying to make something up here and make it as if it's something.
No, I'm not the one making things up.
Okay, let's move on.
Senator Rubio, you talk about what you are and what you're not, and you're quoted as saying in the past that you are not a scientist. Yet $400 billion, as we sit here tonight, in property is at risk because of rising seas. And on a dry day, streets in South Florida, where you live, have flooded. In fact, that happened just yesterday without a raindrop. What are you going to do to protect Floridians in what is clearly an undeniable threat to our coastline and my, and your kids' drinking water?
Absolutely.
With the salt water intrusion?
First of all, what happened yesterday on Miami Beach is a result of king tide. But you're absolutely right in saying they've had some major flooding issues, and I am 100% in favor of mitigation. If, in fact, sea levels are rising and they're impacting our communities, we should spend money to mitigate that. I have a history of working on those issues, going back to the Florida legislature when I was Speaker, and we funded millions of dollars in water projects to prevent flooding. The community I live in West Miami, used to flood severely. Today it floods less so because of projects we were able to secure. Here's the only thing I've said. The only thing I said is that as a policymaker, you have to show me whether the laws that you want me to pass will actually impact the issue that you are raising. And so I have people come to me and say, we want you to pass these laws on carbon emissions. And I ask them, well, how many inches of sea rise will it prevent? And they say, well, none, but it will set a good example for the world. And then I ask the economist, how many jobs will this destroy? How much would it increase the cost of living? And they say pretty dramatically. So they're asking me to support policies that will have no impact on the environment, since China is more than making up for any carbon cuts we would do, but it's going to have a devastating impact on our economy. That's not the approach I want to take. Here's a better approach.
How will you
well,
protect
number one,
Floridians?
mitigation. Number two, I do want this nation to have an all-of-the-above energy strategy. That includes wind and solar and biofuels and renewables. I just quite frankly think it's irresponsible not to also say we're going to fully utilize natural gas and oil and nuclear energy. And yes, clean coal technology has a place in it as well. We should have the broadest, most diverse energy subset possible. You look at NextEra, the company headquartered here in Florida that now has spread across the country. They are an excellent example of a company that's diversified its fuel source. And that will help with all these other issues people are concerned about, but it will do so in a way that's economically responsible, not symbolic or reckless.
National Geographic named Miami as the #1 city in the world to be impacted by climate change. Senator Rubio said that he's not a scientist. Senator, you don't need to be a scientist. Look out your window. Right? There's 2 to 3 inches of salt water on the roads right now. They were not built underwater. Go down to the Florida Keys. The reefs are dying from acidification and bleaching. Come to my district. You'll see the algae. You'll see what's happening there. It's the most biologically diverse estuary in the whole country. Go to the Panhandle. You'll see the oysters dying because the freshwater flows are changing. Everywhere I go in Florida, I see the effects of this. Senator Rubio denies science.
Nancy.
But I'm sorry. He cited 2 water examples that have nothing to do with rising seas. On the issue of Apalachicola Bay and the oystermen, that's because Georgia's stealing our water. And so we're going to make Georgia give us the water, and Georgia's going to pay for it. And the other one, and the second thing that I would point to is on Lake Okeechobee. The problem with Lake Okeechobee is that nutrient-rich water, over 90% of the water going to Lake Okeechobee is flowing from the north of the lake into that lake. And that's what's creating those serious issues. None of those two have anything to do with rising sea levels.
Nancy.
But you're neither a scientist nor a CPA.
Let's move on. And you actually mentioned your father's company briefly earlier. Republicans have referred to you as, quote, privileged Patrick. As someone who's benefited from a financially secure upbringing, how can you relate to and address the concerns of the working poor and the struggling working class in Florida?
Yes, you see, it's important that everyone knows who my dad is, because I believe an attack on my dad is actually an attack on the American dream. My dad never graduated college. He was a union carpenter and a union laborer, and he worked his butt off every single day. And he taught me the value of hard work since very early on. My first job wasn't in an air-conditioned office. My first job was as a day laborer, digging holes and pouring concrete. And I never forgot the value of hard work. Something my opponent, Marco Rubio, did forget. And it's shameful to me that we have a senator with one foot out the door who will not even show up to work. Think about what's at stake in this election. We can do so much more, but you got to show up to work. You got to be there. You can't be in the pocket of the special interest groups. And my opponent, Marco Rubio, when he does show up, always votes with the Koch brothers, time after time. He actually has a 98% score with the Koch brothers, these right-wing special interest groups. So if we're going to be serious about solving problems, you got to be willing to show up. You got to be willing to get things done and work across the aisle, and that's exactly what I'm going to do.
Well, first of all, let me say that not only have I worked hard, but I actually have something to show for my hard work in my time in public service. Going back to my time in the Florida legislature, today property taxes in Florida are lower because of the work we did while I was Speaker. Today there are children's zones here in Orlando and in Liberty City, Florida, and in Jacksonville because of laws that we passed. We reformed the school curriculum in the state when I was Speaker, and we did it without Common Core. And in my time in the U.S. Senate, time and again, on the bills I've already talked about, the Girls Count Act, Senator, is a bipartisan law. And it hasn't gotten a lot of reporting, but I wish it would have, because let me tell you what it did. I worked with Jean Shaheen, a Democrat from New Hampshire, to leverage U.S. foreign aid to pressure foreign countries to ensure that little girls have birth certificates so they're not trafficked into slavery. If we've saved one little girl from slavery, that's meaningful work. And that took a lot of work to accomplish. Which is, you don't even have a single bill that you can cite that you've done like that.
Mark Caputo.
Senator Rubio, you had told me earlier in the year that you opposed abortion for women who were infected with Zika, even if it meant that they would give birth to seriously deformed children. Your opponent used your words in an ad, and then you came out with your own Spanish language ad that said that his characterization was false. And so I'm curious why you would have said that and what your position really is, if you could clarify.
Well, first of all, his ad isn't just about Zika. His ad says, I want to take away reproductive rights from women. That's false. That's just not true. Now, let me talk about the issue of abortion. On the issue of abortion is not an easy issue. Some people pretend that it is. I do not. You talk about a 16-year-old young girl in a crisis pregnancy or a Zika case like you just outlined, people sometimes on my side of that debate act like that's just a no-brainer. It isn't. That's a difficult and painful issue. It's also a difficult issue, by the way, because it involves two competing rights. The right of a woman to choose what to do with her body, that is a real right, and I recognize that. But in this case, there's another right, and that is the right of an unborn child to live. And as a policymaker, these two rights are now in conflict, and I have to choose which side am I going to err on. And if I'm going to err on the side of life. And Mark, I understand that the vast majority of Americans and the vast majority of Floridians perhaps disagree with my view on this issue. But for me, this is not an issue of politics. It's something I feel deeply and passionately about. I believe that all human life is worthy of the protection of our laws, and I respect people that have reached a different conclusion on this issue. But this is how I passionately feel. It's not political to me. If it was, I would take a poll, and I know what the poll is going to say. Here's what I do think is outrageous. What I do think is extremist and outrageous is people like Patrick Murphy and Hillary Clinton that believe no abortions of any kind should be illegal. They believe that it should be legal to abort a child even up to the day before they are due to be born. They believe in partial birth abortion.
Please,
These are horrifying things that actually the vast majority of Americans think are wrong. And what I don't understand is how come the media never points to these extremist positions on the other side of the debate.
Congressman.
Yeah, see, my opponent does not support a woman's right to choose in the case of rape, in the case of incest, or a mother infected with Zika. My opponent went on to put his own political ideology in front of keeping our government open, right? Supporting the defunding of Planned Parenthood instead of keeping our government open. And if that's not bad enough, Senator Rubio supported legislation that became known as the Scarlet Letter. This is legislation that said a woman who wanted to put her child up for an adoption had to take out a newspaper ad and disclose her sexual history. Imagine a woman, victim of rape at her darkest moment, taking a newspaper ad to disclose her sexual history.
Mark,
do you regret that vote, Senator?
Mark, you were around in Tallahassee when that vote passed, and people that covered it understand that vote had the vote of a bunch of Democrats included. No one knew that that's what the law would do because it was an error in the way it was drafted, and it was immediately repealed. And Congressman, this is like the third time tonight that you imply that I don't somehow respect women or that somehow I'm someone that condones the outrageous behavior that the nominee of my party or others may have conducted against women. Congressman, you're the one that posted a picture 4 years on Facebook of you groping a woman. That's inappropriate behavior. And so, again, You look at my record, you look at the things that I've done, some of these issues are very difficult issues, but I do so with the utmost respect for others who have a different point of view.
I think you...
Yeah, let's just talk about Donald Trump again, right? I mean, think about who my opponent, Marco Rubio, has endorsed to be our next president. Bragging about sexually assaulting women? I don't need to hear a lecture from you on women's rights. You do not support a woman's right to choose. When asked about equal pay for women, your quote was that it's a waste of time. Florida and women in Florida are paid about 85% of what a man makes for the same job. And you think that's a waste of time? We can do more. We can do better. And I believe that you've got to show up to get these things done. And unfortunately, you haven't been there for that.
Congressman Murphy, the women in your office make 85% what the men do. So again, I don't know how you can stand
Not
here
true.
and accuse people of that. Here's the second point, though. You talk about the equal pay law. Of course I'm for equal pay for women. I have two girls that are 16 and 14 that in less than a decade will be in the workforce. And I would be outraged if they are good or is better than a man and they're not getting paid the same amount of money. The law you're talking about would have done nothing. Let me tell you what the law you're talking about would have done. Suppose you're a small business, or any business for that matter, and you have two excellent employees, and one is a woman and one is a man. And the woman is much better than the man. And so another company from halfway across the country comes and tries to hire her away, and you try to give her a raise to keep her. You can't, unless you give the man a raise under that law that you supported. It has unintended consequences that would not have achieved parity in pay, but would have had these consequences of making it very difficult for businesses to actually give raises to men and to women.
Okay, I have a question to both of you. There's been a lot of question about the legitimacy of this election. Donald Trump has said this election is absolutely being rigged. He's talking not just about media coverage, but he's saying that precinct by precinct there is voter fraud throughout the country. So my question to each of you is, do you have faith in the democratic process in this state and in this country? And do you believe the voters of Florida should have faith in the results on November 8th, both of this race and of the presidential race? I'll begin with you.
Absolutely. This election's not being rigged. And I'm explaining to you why it's not being rigged in Florida and why I hope he stops saying that. Why he should stop saying that. We have 67 counties in this state, each of which conduct their own elections. I promise you there is not a 67-county conspiracy to rig this election. Second, the governor of the state of Florida is a Republican who appoints the people that run the division of elections. Third, there's no evidence behind any of this. And so this should not continue to be said. And do I believe people should have confidence? Yes. And do I believe they should vote? Absolutely. And let me tell you what, let me add to this. This is a state that literally has millions of people who came here because they couldn't vote in the nation of their birth. It would be a tragedy if they gave up their vote here as well.
Congressman.
Donald Trump said it himself. He's unhinged now, right? He's going to stop at nothing to try to gin up his right-wing base.
Unshackled was his term, unshackled.
Unshackled, unhinged, really who's counting at this point? Think about what Donald Trump has said. I believe what sets us apart as a nation, one of the many things, is that we do respect our election process, that we do have fair elections where people are going to show up. And Senator Rubio and I are going to tell you all that we do, and we are going to accept the results of this election. But unfortunately, you're still standing by Donald Trump's side, and that is shameful to me. There is too much at stake, and words matter when it's the presidential nominee.
Okay, I want to get one last question. We have to keep the time. On the question of Cuba. Congressman Murphy, you have praised President Obama's opening to Cuba. Given the continued human rights abuses on the island, the lack of progress since the opening began, do you support lifting the U.S. embargo on Cuba, yes or no? Would you vote to lift the embargo?
Well, I do support the president's attempts to normalize relations with Cuba. And look, I have aunts and cousins that are Cuban. I remember every Christmas Eve going around sitting around the Cocina talking about politics, talking about Cuba. So I understand that this is a very personal issue for many people. And I respect my opponent's position on this. But we've had over 50 years of a failed policy that hasn't worked. Right? Let's give Castro and the regime exactly what they fear the most, and that's capitalism. And I believe that we can turn that chapter and help the Cuban people. So I do support targeted sanctions on the bad actors in the Castro regime.
30 seconds.
Well, again, I would say to you that I'm not against changes to policy towards Cuba. I'm against one-sided changes to policy towards Cuba that makes all the concessions to them and asks for nothing in return. Here's how good the opening to Cuba is going. It's going so well that now the Cubans have invited the Russians to open a military base 90 miles from our shores for the first time since the end of the Cold War. Repression is up. More people are in jail today than before this deal. All 57 of the people that were freed as a result of this deal have been rearrested at least once. And by the way, they are still harboring fugitives of American justice, including Joanne Chesmar, a cop killer who murdered a New Jersey state trooper. This deal is not working out well for anyone except Raul Castro and his cronies that make millions of dollars off of this opening.
Okay, that is all the time we have for questions. We now turn to closing statements. Congressman Murphy, you're first.
Well, thank you for moderating. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Senator Rubio. I'm proud of what I've accomplished over the past 4 years in the Congress. Proud of the cuts I was able to prevent to Medicare. Proud of legislation I passed to ensure that we lower flood insurance rates. Proud of the $2 billion I was able to help bring home for the Everglades. And I'm going to continue to show up because I'm also proud of my 97% voting record. You compare that to Marco Rubio, the worst voting record of any senator from Florida in nearly 50 years, right? 1 foot out the door. Florida deserves better. Think about what's at stake in this election. The U.S. Supreme Court hangs in the balance. The majority in the Senate. Climate change has to be addressed, and my opponent still denies it. We have to support a woman's right to choose. We have to invest more in education. We have to invest more in infrastructure. And I'm proud of the endorsements I received, from the Orlando Sentinel to the Tampa Bay Times to the Sun Sentinel. And let's note that 2 of those endorsed my opponent, but they also agree that he is shirking his responsibilities and not showing up to be a senator from Florida, and I will.
Senator Rubio.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you all for this hour we've been here together. The hour has now passed, and you have yet to hear much of a record after 4 years in Congress for Congressman Murphy. He talks about saving cuts to Medicare. He didn't save cuts to Medicare. He signed on to a letter. If signing on to a letter, which, by the way, I signed on to as well 2 months before he did, but I haven't talked about that tonight because if signing on to a letter is the sign of an achievement today in Washington, well, that tells you everything you need to know about what's wrong with that place. I'm honored to have served the people of Florida in the U.S. Senate. I want to continue to do so, and I'm proud of what we've achieved in our time there. I'll talk about them again tonight, but there's one in particular that I'm very proud of, and that's the work I did on behalf of some very important people, many of whom still live in this community, and that's the Borinqueneers. They're from Puerto Rico. They had to serve in a segregated unit. They were given some of the most difficult assignments in Korea and in Vietnam, and no one ever recognized them for it. And I, along with my colleagues across the aisle, finally got them the Congressional Gold Medal of Honor. And I was proud to be there that day in the White House when the president signed that into law. Just one more achievement. Compare that to Patrick Murphy's record of doing absolutely nothing.
Okay.
He says he's a full-time congressman, but he has a part-time no-show record.
That's all the time we have. Thank you for watching tonight. Thank you to our host, the University of Central Florida. Thank you to my colleagues, Greg Warmoth, Nancy Alvarez, Mark Caputo. I'm Jonathan Carl with ABC News. Thank you and good night.